Before we begin, just a quick note to viewers who value this kind of deep, source-driven history. Please subscribe to the Survival Record. This channel exists for people who care about what war really did to societies, not just how battles were won. Most people, assume civilian survival in World War II came down to ration cards and government charity. But that's really just the simplified version. The harder truth is that rationing systems alone were never enough. In every country, under prolonged strain, bombing, blockade, occupation, or total mobilization, millions of civilians stayed fed because they quietly reinvented food systems from the ground up. These were not acts of desperation so much as adaptive intelligence. They were practical, often ingenious responses to structural collapse. And honestly, many of them shaped post-war thinking about resilience, logistics, and civil defense. What's striking is how rarely these systems are discussed, even though they kept entire populations functional for years. What follows are 6 civilian survival practices from World War II that worked not because they were heroic, but because they were disciplined, collective, and, well, brutally realistic. One of the most effective food systems of the war was built in backyards, schoolyards, and even bomb craters. Britain's Dig for Victory campaign is often remembered as cheerful propaganda, but honestly, its real significance lies in how completely it rewired civilian expectations. By 1943, roughly half of Britain's fresh produce was coming from small-scale domestic plots rather than commercial farms. Lawns, tennis courts, public parks, and even sections of Hyde Park were converted into food-producing ground. This worked because it wasn't symbolic gardening. The Ministry of Agriculture, issued detailed guidance on calorie yield per square meter, crop rotation under low fertilizer conditions, and seasonal planning that assumed seed shortages and tool scarcity. Civilians were encouraged to grow crops that stored well, potatoes, onions, carrots, rather than nutritionally fashionable produce. The deeper lesson here is logistical. Britain faced a U-boat blockade that threatened maritime supply chains. By decentralizing food production into millions of micro-farms, the state reduced dependence on vulnerable transport networks. This principle, distributed production as a hedge against systemic disruption, later influenced Cold War civil defense planning and, actually, modern resilience theory. In occupied Europe, hidden livestock and illicit slaughter, they actually sustained entire neighborhoods. Under German occupation, official ration allocations in much of Europe, fell below subsistence level. In places like Poland, France, and the Netherlands, survival really depended on what the occupation authorities could not fully see or control. Families hid chickens in cellars, pigs in false walls, and goats in abandoned buildings. These animals, they were fed on kitchen scraps, forage, and even stolen agricultural byproducts. Slaughtering was done quietly, often at night, and meat was distributed within trusted social networks. This wasn't merely black market behavior. It was, in fact, a form of parallel provisioning. Occupation authorities could seize grain shipments or enforce quotas on registered farms, but they really struggled to suppress dispersed, informal food systems embedded in private homes. The social cost was high. Discovery meant severe punishment. But the payoff was nutritional survival. Post-war food security studies, they repeatedly return to this lesson. Centralized control is powerful, but it is, brittle. Informal networks, when socially cohesive, can actually outperform formal systems under coercive conditions. Civilian preservation skills turned seasonal harvests into year-round lifelines. refrigeration was rare, electricity unreliable, and, honestly, transport was often disrupted. Civilians survived by mastering preservation methods that modern societies had largely abandoned by the 1930s. Canning, bottling, pickling, drying, salting, and smoking. These weren't hobbies. They were, in fact, strategic practices. In Germany and Eastern Europe, communal canning centers allowed families to process large quantities of produce efficiently using shared equipment. Meanwhile, in Japan, urban households dried vegetables and fish to reduce dependence on rice deliveries, which were increasingly diverted to the military. What really mattered was predictability. Preserved food, you see, reduced exposure to ration fluctuations, bombing damage, and transport failures. It also allowed households to smooth out calorie intake across the year, which had measurable effects on health outcomes, especially among children. Modern disaster preparedness, interestingly enough, often rediscovers these methods as novelties. But during the Second World War, they were just baseline competence, taught in schools and reinforced through public instruction. Urban foraging quietly supplemented official rations in ways that governments rarely acknowledged. In bombed cities, ruins actually became resources. Civilians collected edible weeds, mushrooms, nuts, and even snails from parks, riverbanks, and abandoned lots. Food-sharing networks, actually stepped in where money simply stopped working as markets collapsed. Inflation, currency manipulation, and, occupation policies made cash pretty much useless across much of Europe and Asia. So, in response, civilians turned back to barter and reciprocal exchange to get by. Urban families, for instance, often traded their labor for food with rural relatives. Clothes, furniture, and even tools were swapped for grain or dairy products. In some places, especially in the Soviet Union and China, entire local economies ran on trust-based credit systems instead of any formal currency. One of the most overlooked survival strategies during the Second World War was, interestingly enough, intellectual. Governments actually redefined what adequate nutrition meant for their people. British scientists recalculated minimum dietary requirements using whatever foods were available, focusing on caloric sufficiency and essential micronutrients rather than, dietary variety. This had lasting consequences. Post-war food policy, welfare programs, and even modern dietary guidelines trace their roots to wartime necessity-driven science. World War II civilian food survival wasn't accidental, and it wasn't purely governmental either. It was really the product of ordinary people adapting intelligently to systemic failure, often faster than institutions could respond. These stories matter because they challenge comforting assumptions. They show that resilience is learned, that decentralization can save lives, and that knowledge, practical, local, often unglamorous, can be as decisive as any weapon system. For survivalists, historians, and anyone concerned with how societies endure prolonged stress, these lessons remain, frankly, painfully relevant. If you value this kind of grounded, overlooked history, subscribe to the Survival Record. Share this video with others who care about serious analysis over surface-level storytelling. Understanding how civilians survived the last total war may be one of the most practical forms of preparedness we have.